Now, we're $15 trillion in debt. We spend $1.50 for every dollar of revenue we receive. That's unsustainable. Every dollar, as I said, is 46 cents in debt when it's barely printed. So therefore, it isn't a dollar. It's barely a half dollar. There's some unlawful implications here. You know that if you or I turned a piece of paper into something and took it out and called it a dollar, said this is worth a dollar, the word counterfeiting might come up. But the Federal Reserve and the Treasury can do this. Obviously, they play by different game rules than we do. This all gets back to my basic point with the slides of the cities. The Fed has damaged the country. The Fed has damaged the people. The best way to correct the problem of the Federal Reserve is to implement state banks. To capsulize our problem in America economically right now, we have too much centralized power. What state banks does is decentralize the financial part of this too much centralized power. There are other things that need to be decentralized too, but since the banks tend to, or the system tends to fund all of those other things, it's a really good place to start. Because what it does is cuts off the head of the snake by removing state dollars from being sent to the Federal Reserve. Okay. Another comment I'd make, by the way, it's very, very important to understand this. I don't know how many of you have read the reports on this rage thing that's supposed to happen on the 17th of December. Yeah, September, isn't it? 7th? Yeah, and so on. If the Federal Reserve gets taken down improperly, violently, you can take what we have that we can expect to happen right now and multiply the damage by 10. It has got to be done lawfully. It has got to be done peacefully. But it's got to be done. They do have to come down. You might want to ask yourself this question. I do a lot. How can we, without being hypocritical, and I always remember Christ and "O ye hypocrites" on the steps of the temple. How can we go to those who are violating our constitutional rights and unconstitutionally remove their power to do so without being a hypocrite? There are legal, lawful, honorable ways to do this. When our founding fathers decided they'd had enough of England and the crown, they did something. They wrote a document. What was it called again? Declaration, yeah, our Bill of Rights that came after with the Constitution. We need to do it right. That's why I consider state banks to be the most critical issue that we can deal with. Well, you may wonder if I'm here to talk about state banks, why am I talking so much about the Fed? I wanted you to understand from my perspective why it's so important, why it's a critical issue, why we've got to get rid of this creature from Jekyll Island, as Ed says in his book so eloquently. I also want to tell you that state banks is a very popular idea right now. I started writing about the state banking system, the concept, about a little over 2 years ago. And since that time, I think probably there are a lot of people in North Dakota who are very angry at me because they get a lot of calls from around the country. But since that time, Washington, Oregon, California, Hawaii, Illinois, Montana, Florida, Virginia, Maryland, I said Virginia, and Massachusetts have all begun the legislative process of implementing a state bank. And I asked Ray Scott, Representative Scott, and asked him if it was okay to tell our live audience here in Colorado that he will place state bank legislation before the Colorado legislature when it reconvenes in January 2012. And thank you, Representative Scott and Representative Conti, for their support on this. They have been marvelous. There's only one state bank in the United States, and it is in North Dakota. Bank of North Dakota, or as we lovingly call it, BND. So, because we get tired of saying Bank of North Dakota sometimes. It is 93 years old, formed in 1919. So when we talk about what we can expect from a state bank, we don't have to guess. We've got history on our side. What are the benefits of a state bank? The first thing I have to say, I don't have time to tell you now, but please accept the fact we have state-chartered banks in Colorado now. Most states have state-chartered banks, right? This is not the same thing. This is a state-owned bank. It's not a state-chartered bank. The state bank, when you have a state-owned bank, charters members itself. So it is not a state-chartered bank. They're two different things. Okay. It's a confusing explanation, so just accept, please, my word for it. They're very different. A state bank is owned by the state. A state-chartered bank is not. Okay. Now, here's some of the things you can expect from a state bank based on results from the North Dakota State Bank. With a population of about 650,000 people, the North Dakota State Bank has, during the past 10 years, paid the state of North Dakota $325 million from bank profits. In 2010, I believe also in 2009, the worst economy in recent history, where every state is having a budget deficit, especially in places like Colorado that's so dependent on tourism, North Dakota had its largest budget surplus in that state's history. North Dakota tops the list of state economies year after year. But let's talk about jobs. Unemployment, as John Michael was saying, you know, if you look at the statistics, it's 9.1. We all know it's closer to 19, 20% when you take into consideration the people who have given up looking for work or who have taken a job as a hamburger flipper. If you go to some place like Detroit, Michigan, you're looking at 50%. I have a friend in Michigan who says, you cannot believe how bad it is here. But let's just take their numbers. The national unemployment rate, 9.1%. Colorado, 8.5%. North Dakota, as of July 2011, 3.3%. Reducing taxes. Here's a benefit from a state bank. In 2011, North Dakotans will see almost $500 million of their money returned to them in the form of income and property tax cuts. Now, if you take the 2009 and 2011 tax reductions, the average North Dakotan will enjoy a 30% tax liability drop. The legislature also funded $342 million in property tax relief. How long has it been since we've heard that? The word property tax relief instead of increase. The owner of a $150,000 home will enjoy a tax reduction of $506. Not bad. So here's the breakdown of how their tax reduction program went in North Dakota. $342 million approximately in property tax relief. That money goes to the superintendent of schools for grants to school districts under the mill levy reduction program. I love those words, mill levy reduction. Oh, instead of increase. 120 million reduces all individual income tax rates by 17.9%. 25 million reduces all existing corporate income tax rates by 19.5%. Does anybody wonder why business is moving to North Dakota? Representative Scott was telling me the other day, he had a friend who went there. He had to drive 80 miles on a 2-lane highway out in the country, paved, all very nice. It took him 4 hours. The traffic is so heavy in North Dakota on its highways. This is not Los Angeles and Disneyland or Orlando and Disney World type tourism. This is business traffic. He said it was literally stop and go in some places. So the 25 million reduces the corporate tax by 19.5. You have a 2.125 million reduction in financial institutions tax rate to get them to loan. And they are loaning in North Dakota. By the way, they haven't had a bank failure during this entire crisis. So if you support schools or reduced income taxes, which stimulate retail sales, which stimulates job creation, you support state banks. The Bank of North Dakota is a big reason that the state has been able to do what they've done with taxes and so on. On July 18th, I found an Associated Press article reported that jobs in North Dakota increased by 61,000 since 2000. That doesn't sound like a lot of jobs, unless you're losing jobs, which we are in Colorado. But this is only a 700,000 population, less than 700,000. And the Denver suburban area is 2.5 million just by itself, without getting into Grand Junction and Durango and Pueblo and so on. So how do we know? Oh, I meant to say about 15,000 of their jobs are still available in North Dakota if you're looking or you know anyone else who is looking. But how do we know, how can we tell that the Bank of North Dakota is largely responsible for the state's economic performance? The first time I talked about state banks was at the Pueblo Liberty Action Group. And one of the first questions asked was, how much of an impact did the Bakken oil fields have on North Dakota's wealth? Well, I looked it up, actually, after that night. Montana and South Dakota and Wyoming all enjoyed an energy boom. Montana and Wyoming have extracted far more gas and oil than North Dakota. The Bakken oil field stretches across Montana as well as North Dakota, and the greatest oil production comes from the Elm Coulee field in Montana, not North Dakota. The unemployment rate in Montana is 7.7%. It's 3.3% in North Dakota. Alaska has roughly the same population North Dakota has. It produces about twice as much oil as they're getting out of the Bakken fields. Unemployment in Alaska is also 7.7%. In 2000, this is a good statistic. I really like this one. In 2009, North Dakota's payroll growth, key statistic to business growth, payroll growth in the private, not the public, the private sector, was 5.2%. The payroll growth in Texas placed it second at 2.6%. That's exactly half of the performance in North Dakota. I would point out that Texas is the largest oil-producing state in the Union at 1 million barrels per day. So it's not the oil of the Bakken fields that is driving this wealth that's going on in North Dakota.